Listen up. If you were staring at the gold charts last night or watching the S&P 500 flash crash and erase an entire year's worth of gains in an instant, you're probably feeling pretty lost. You're asking yourself, what on earth is happening? Is it inflation? Is it war? No. What's actually making Wall Street gasp for air isn't some massive macro data point. It's a tiny $100 million trade notification that most mainstream media completely ignored. Just yesterday, a famous Danish pension fund called Icom Pension made a hardcore move. They liquidated every single US Treasury they owned, not a dime left. They're completely out. Their reasoning sounds wild, yet it's terrifyingly real. They believe the US government's aggressive move to basically annex Greenland has made US credit unreliable. Now, you might laugh out $100 million. In a $38 trillion Treasury market, that's less than a drop in the bucket. But if that's what you think, you're missing how the financial markets actually send signals. This $100 million wasn't just a simple sale. It's a canary in the coal mine that just died right on the Fed's doorstep. It signals that the world's most conservative, risk-averse pension capital is starting to vote with its feet. When your closest allies start throwing treasuries, the supposed bedrock of safety, into the trash, it shatters the confidence of investors everywhere. That is exactly why gold surged to $4,800 overnight. This isn't just people looking for a safe haven anymore. This is a trial in absentia for the US dollar's credit system. The market is panicking. Investors are thinking, if they're willing to grab an ally's territory, are they going to default on my bonds next? But to trigger a triple threat bloodbath in stocks, bonds, and forex, one Danish butterfly isn't enough. The real nightmare is that this butterfly's wings happened to set off the biggest powder keg in Asia, Japan. While we were all distracted by the Greenland drama, another thread was quietly strangling the market. Yields on Japan's 30-year government bonds spiked by 25 basis points in a single day. Why? Because the market is terrified that the aggressive fiscal plans from Japan's new leadership under Sanae Takaichi will wreck their finances. This forced a massive wave of yen carry trades to liquidate. Here's the vicious death spiral we're looking at. Denmark dumping treasuries is a political signal that makes everyone doubt US credit. Treasury yields go up. At the same time, Japanese bond yields are skyrocketing. Global borrowing costs explode. All those trillions of dollars that were borrowed in cheap yen to buy US stocks and bonds suddenly realize the interest rate gap is gone and the risk is off the charts. So, they were forced to dump everything to pay back their debts. That is the truth behind the S&P 500's collapse last night. It's not that the fundamentals are broken. It's that the liquidity has dried up. That $100 million from Denmark was the final straw that broke the camel's back. Or better yet, it was the match thrown into a room full of gas. It ignited a panic that's been building up over Trump's geopolitical moves, his interference in Venezuela, and the risk of NATO splitting apart. Investors used to just brush it off, thinking Trump was just talking big. But when he actually uses AI maps to show his territorial ambitions and even threatens military action against allies, the market's patience ran out. Everyone realized the worst-case scenario might actually happen: NATO breaking up in a full-scale trade war. Now do you see why gold is going crazy? When the Central Bank of Poland announces they're adding 150 tons of gold to their reserves right as Denmark is bailing out of treasuries, it's basically a billion-dollar advertisement for gold. The market reached a consensus in that moment. When the safest asset, the US Treasury, becomes a political risk, and your best friend Denmark starts doubting your credit, gold becomes the only bunker left in this chaotic world. But this is just the financial tsunami. Behind this Greenland storm, there's a darker corner where a man is laughing his head off. He's watching the US and Europe tear each other's faces off over a piece of ice. He's watching NATO turn into a total mess. He hasn't fired a single shot, but he's about to win the victory. He couldn't get on the battlefield in Ukraine. Let's shift our perspective from Wall Street to Moscow to see how Putin is using this absurd island-grabbing drama to pull off his most brilliant move yet. While Wall Street was screaming in pain, Moscow was filled with a weirdly festive vibe. Normally, if the US wants to expand its territory and mess around in the Arctic Circle, Russia should be the most nervous, right? But it's the exact opposite. Regarding Trump's bizarre play for Greenland, the Kremlin isn't protesting. They're acting like a cheerleading squad. Just listen to what Putin's press secretary Peskov said. He said if Trump actually pulls off the Greenland grab, he'll go down in history not just for America, but for the world. That's not a compliment, it's a trap. He's basically saying, go ahead, go grab it, and let the whole world see how ugly your greed really is. Medvedev was even more brutal. The former Russian president went straight to mocking the situation. He said that when Trump says make America great again, what he really means is, make Denmark smaller and make Europe poor again. Russian state media even said it's a total joy to watch the US and Europe rip each other apart over this land, leading to the total collapse of European morale. Why are the Russians so excited? Because in Putin's eyes, the big gift of 2026 isn't higher oil prices. It's the spiritual death of NATO. Putin sees the chain reaction here. Look at Ukraine. Zelensky is only holding on because of the alliance between the US and Europe and the moral high ground of the West, standing against aggression. But now the script has flipped. The leader of the pack, the US, is swinging the tariff club at its own little brother. Denmark, a core member of the EU and NATO. This instantly kills the logic for Europe to keep helping Ukraine. If the US can just trample on the sovereignty of a NATO ally, why should Europeans tighten their belts to fight for Ukraine, which isn't even in NATO? If everyone has to just shut up and take it when Denmark gets bullied, then what's the point of dying for Kyiv? Once Europeans start feeling like the US is more of a bandit than Russia, the Western alliance of values is shattered. Russia doesn't even need to fire another shell in the Donbass. Just by watching the Greenland drama, they can see Kyiv's political supply lines snap. Plus, this gives Moscow a perfect legal excuse. Putin's thinking is simple. If the US can just annex Greenland out of thin air, then Russia, taking back the Donbass, which has deep historical and ethnic ties to Russia's perfectly natural, the US basically just handed Putin the knife to justify aggression. This is what's actually choking the Danish pension funds and all European capital. They aren't just afraid of losing a piece of land. They're afraid that in this new world, the big boss has gone crazy and the rules are gone. When the red lines of geopolitics are erased, the US Treasury, which represents the credit of the nation, becomes nothing more than a scrap of paper. But external threats are just the surface. What really made the Danes decide to dump everything is the rotting fiscal core inside the US. What happened to that savior, Elon Musk, and his Doge? Don't even talk about it anymore. It's dead. For the top-tier funds on Wall Street, the end of Doge isn't news. It's just a cold, hard fact. Its failure doesn't just mean Musk lost. It means the last self-correcting mechanism in the US system has completely stopped working. It's like a heavy truck racing toward a cliff. Everyone hoped a mechanic would jump on and fix the brakes. Now, the mechanic has thrown up his hands and walked away. This sends a desperate signal to every creditor in the world. In this massive web of interests, nobody, not even the richest man on earth, can cut a single dollar of mandatory spending. The bloated bureaucracy, the insane military budget, the untouchable social programs, these three mountains aren't just a burden. They are cancer cells that have spread to the bone marrow. So, the Danish logic is simple, since cutting costs is a joke. This truck is definitely going over the cliff. And here's the kicker. Trump, who is in the driver's seat, isn't hitting the brakes. He's slamming on the gas. This brings us to the core economic lie of the Trump 2.0 era, the Big Beauty Act. To keep creditors calm, Trump tossed out a logic that sounds great on paper. He says, don't worry, even though I'm doing massive tax cuts and spending a ton on infrastructure, I've got tariffs. I'll collect protection money from the whole world and use that tariff revenue to fill the deficit. That is a total insult to Wall Street's math skills. We don't even need complex models. Just do simple elementary school subtraction. Look at the current situation. Without any new policies, the US government's basic mandatory deficit is already $1.8 trillion a year. Remember that number, 1.8 trillion. That's just the money needed to keep the lights on. That's new debt that has to be borrowed. So, how much can Trump's famous tariffs actually bring in? Even if he burns every bridge and raises tariffs to the moon, the most optimistic estimate for new revenue is only a few $100 billion. See the problem? On one side, you have a $1.8 trillion bottomless pit. On the other side, you have a tiny garden hose of tariff money. You're trying to use a garden hose to fill a $1.8 trillion sinkhole. That's not economics. It's performance art. Especially when the tax cuts in the Big Beauty Act are just digging that hole even deeper. The conclusion is brutal and inevitable. Tariffs aren't a lifesaver. They can't even cover the interest. There is a massive unbridgeable gap in funding. And there is only one way out. Keep printing money and keep issuing debt until the currency collapses. That is the essence of the Treasury crisis that the Danish pension fund realized. It's not just one president making a mistake. It's a systemic failure. When the macro math doesn't add up, the market stops listening to what politicians say and starts watching where the money is running. For us, $4,800, gold isn't just about price movement anymore. It's about the underlying logic of global credit being rebuilt. In this world of extreme uncertainty, I've put together a liquidity black hole hedging plan to help clear up these complex macro signals. It's like a logical map from a macro perspective, breaking down how different asset classes actually perform. I've put the materials in the comments section, just click to grab them. Politicians can blow through tomorrow's credit without a second thought just to get today's votes. They print money and throw it around to get applause right now. As for whether this debt will cause an inflation tsunami or a national bankruptcy later, that's for the next president to deal with. That's for you foreigners holding US Treasuries to deal with. When you have a 120% debt to GDP ratio and a $1.8 trillion mandatory deficit that nobody can touch, any rational investor is going to ask themselves one thing. If this truck is destined to crash, why am I still sitting in the passenger seat? So, they chose to jump out. And when these trillions of dollars leave the Treasury market, they have to find a new miracle spot. In this chaotic world of collapsing credit, where is the real shelter? If the Danish liquidation was the spark, what happens next is the explosion of the entire gas station. This is Iron Bull Finance, helping you read the global trends and stay ahead of the game. We need to talk about a term that's becoming very popular on Wall Street, the co-trade. What does it mean? It's a gambler's mindset. For the past few years, traders have become immune to Trump's big talk. Everyone thought, oh, he's just scaring people. He'll back down in the end. So no matter how much Trump yelled on social media, market volatility stayed weirdly low at levels not seen since 1990. It's the boy who cried wolf story. Everyone got bored and just went about their business. But last night, the wolf actually showed up. The Greenland crisis completely killed the co-trade. The market suddenly realized that this time is different. The move to control Greenland isn't a negotiation tactic. It's a real move that could lead to the end of NATO or a full trade war. That's why the VIX Volatility Index shot up to its highest level since last November. The mental defense line that Trump will always compromise has been shattered, and the game gets even better. You think this is just a crash in Treasuries? No. This might be a carefully planned counterattack. Look at what one chief investment officer said. If I were an advisor to European governments, I'd tell them they need to create some market volatility because that's the one thing Trump really cares about. This is an open plot. Europeans know Trump too well. He looks at the US stock market as his personal report card and his source of pride. If diplomatic protests don't work, and tariff threats don't work, then they'll hit him where it hurts, his stock market. The Danish pension fund's loud exit might not just be about safety, it's a form of financial deterrence. Europe is telling the White House with actions, not words. If you dare touch our territory, we will dare to wreck your market. You want the US stock market to fall? We'll make it happen for you. This is the kind of extreme pressure you only see at the financial nuclear level. One side uses tariffs and sovereignty as chips, and the other side uses Treasury and stock market liquidity as chips. This mutual destruction game is what's really making Wall Street choke. Because in this fight between giants, no asset is safe except for the one bystander, gold. Now the market is forced to face a massive black hole of uncertainty. Strategists at Jefferies say these tensions could take months to resolve. The Supreme Court's ruling on the tariff case is at least a month away. This means this soul-crushing volatility is just getting started. In this new normal of mutual damage, how do we as regular investors survive this arena? Should we buy defense stocks that profit from war, or just hold on to our gold? Stick around, because I'm giving you the final chief's directive at the end of this video. To wrap things up, we have to face a very cold reality. The weird calm that Wall Street enjoyed for weeks is gone. Just yesterday, as the S&P 500 dropped over 2% and wiped out all its gains for the year, a long-forgotten ghost started haunting Wall Street again, the Sell America trade. For the last month, traders were playing the co-game, betting Trump would back down at the last second. But the co-trade is dead. When Trump actually reaches for Greenland and the Danes actually leave the room, the fantasy that it's all just talk is over. The market is now pricing in the worst-case scenario. So, my first chief's directive is this: stop the habit of trying to buy the dip immediately. Don't assume this is just another regular pullback. The CIO of Allianz Global Investors put it very bluntly. Europe is creating pain to force the White House back to the negotiating table. In this phase of giants fighting, blindly buying the dip is just catching falling knives. Besides the geopolitical cards on the table, you have to keep your eyes on the hidden liquidity killer, Japan. The trigger for this global sell-off isn't just Denmark. It's the fiscal panic inside Japan. The 30-year JGB yield, spiking 25 basis points in a day, is an extremely rare and violent move. What does that mean? It means the world's biggest pool of cheap money is drying up. Countless institutions used to borrow cheap yen to buy treasuries and Nvidia. That's the carry trade. But now, with the aggressive fiscal plans in Japan, bond prices are crashing and borrowing costs are soaring. It's like someone suddenly pulled the plug on the pump under the global asset building. The reversal of the carry trade is a more direct liquidity crisis than geopolitics. So, the second directive: be extremely careful with assets that rely on heavy leverage. When the cheap money is gone, those high-valuation tech growth stocks will be the first victims of the liquidity backlash. So where should the money go? In this window of uncertainty, we need to build a masts and sales portfolio for survival. The mast must be an absolutely anti-fragile asset, like gold. Don't try to guess the top of $4,800 gold. In this moment of credit collapse, gold isn't for profit. It's for grounding yourself. It is the only anti-Trump asset on your balance sheet. As long as the Danes don't buy back treasuries. As long as the cracks in NATO remain. And as long as the foundation of the US dollar's credit is shaking, this gold mast is the only thing keeping you from being swept away by the tsunami of inflation and default. The sales are about catching the energy of the chaos. Since the storm is unavoidable, open your sails and use that energy to move forward. Buy defense stocks. Jefferies pointed out clearly that going long on defense stocks makes sense. If Trump is going to play power politics, and Europe is going to seek strategic autonomy, a global arms race is inevitable. Defense stocks are one of the few assets that can directly profit from geopolitical conflict. Also, keep an eye on bank stocks. Even though the bond market is messy, the soaring long-term yields make the yield curve steeper, which is actually good for banks' interest income. Finally, I want to mention that some strategists are still trying to comfort the market, saying a compromise will eventually be reached. Maybe in a few months, Trump will sit at the negotiating table. But as analysts warn, if the situation gets out of control, the impact will be very severe and will have long-term consequences. In these next few months of garbage time, Don't try to bet on the conscience of politicians or the rationality of the market. Drop your gold anchor, open your defensive sails, and keep your eyes on those Japanese bond yields. When that Danish canary falls at the Fed's doorstep, we aren't just looking at a simple market fluctuation. We are looking at a deep reshaping of the global credit contract. From that $100 million sale, triggering a yen carry trade harvest, to the mathematical reality that a tiny garden hose of tariffs can't fill a massive fiscal sinkhole. All these logic threads tied together announce that the era of big talk, immunity, and cheap leverage is over. In the coming months, the market will enter a period of extreme instability between political games and drying liquidity. This new normal requires us to establish a hardcore hedging strategy before the panic spreads. That's why I've organized a full liquidity black hole hedging resource, which I've placed in the comments for you to grab. If today's content helped you see the other side of the market more clearly, please give this video a like. Your likes help more investors see the truth. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Iron Bull Finance. When the wind changes direction again, you'll be the first to get the signal.